Morning folks, I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters and the Pathfinder School. And what I thought we'd do today is talk a little bit about trapline prep. I have a trapping class coming up here at the Pathfinder School the 9th or 10th to the 14th or something of next month. I think those are the dates, I'm not sure. And then I also have trapping season coming up. And I've had a lot of requests for trapping type videos, so I'm going to make a video today on prepping for trapping season. And one of the things that we need to talk about real quick is, you know, I've been trapping for quite a while now, and I've been to the Fur Takers of America College 2 times. I'm a certified expert trapper with the Fur Takers of America, and I've found over time that there's certain things that you really are going to want on the trap line versus a lot of the fluff that people think you need on the trap line. And a lot of that depends on what type of trapping you're doing and what type of traps you're using. And as you'll see later in this video, I use a pretty good variety of traps because of the way I trap. I trap for self-reliance. I'm not trying to get that big fur check at the end of the month, or the end of the trapping season, excuse me, by running a big long line of 200 traps. I run about 24 traps maximum at any given time, and sometimes I'll switch them in and out depending on what I'm trying to trap. But I try to trap a good variety of animals, A, for practice, B, so that I can fill my freezer with some meat that I can have during the winter time if I want it, and also for just a few furs to have for trade and things like that, or to give away to kids at classes when they want to mess with a piece of leather or fur. So that's why I trap. But in a self-reliance scenario, which we'll talk about a little bit more, there's certain ways to trap, and if you're trying to get that big fur check at the end of season, there's other ways to trap. So those things are all really up to you. But what I want to talk to you about today real quick, other than trap prep for the season is, or how I do it, is I want to talk a little bit about the tools that you need versus the tools that many people might think you need. So let's first talk about Canterbury type traps, which are your X-closing suitcase type traps that are killing traps for blind sets. And they come from 110 to 330 and everything in between. 110 being for your smaller animals like mink, 330s being for the big boys like beaver. You're going to want, first of all, a set of fence pliers is indispensable on the trap line no matter what you're trapping, and some trapping wire is indispensable on the trap line no matter what you're trapping. Those two things you're going to want no matter what. If you're using Canterbury type traps, you're definitely going to want a safety device that you can put over that trap before you release the safeties off of it and things like that, and you get ready to walk away from the trap. But while you're making your set, you're going to want this safety on there to make sure that you can't accidentally spring that trap on yourself, whether it's a 110 or whether it's a 330. A set of trap setters or spring setters like these come in real handy for the larger stuff, 220s, 330s, things that have double springs on them that are a little bit more difficult or a lot more difficult to set by hand. But this tool makes it much easier, especially in cold weather or in the winter, or when the trap is frozen up with an animal in it or something like that. This makes it very easy to get that taken care of. And then you're going to want some type of a rope with you all the time, especially if you're using larger Canterbury's. In case you were to have an accident, you can get that trap opened up and off your arm or whatever it's trapped around. So for Canterbury's, a safety, some type of a rope. It doesn't have to have necessarily a hook on it. I use this one for also putting my game gambrel on as well when I'm skinning out on the line. And then a heavy duty set of trap setters. And that's going to do you pretty well for Canterbury trapping. Now, you may also choose to use things like these H stands, which are really, really convenient for Canterbury trapping because you just drop the Canterbury in the H and you shove it down in the ground at the height you want it off the trail, and you're set to go. You don't have to cut a bunch of sticks or mess around. The other advantage to these is, you know, Canterbury traps are made to kill the animal on the spot. And I've never had a Canterbury run away. That's not to say that it couldn't happen, but I've never had it happen. So if you're setting these traps, you can also use this H stand to put the loop of that trap around and bury it in the ground, and it becomes somewhat of a stake as well as becoming a trap stand. I like these H stands really well, especially if I'm only using, you know, 6 Canterbury's on my line or 7 Canterbury's on my line altogether. Carrying 7 extra stands isn't that big a deal and makes it a lot easier than trying to fool with cutting sticks and carving and whittling while you're out on the line. But I will show you how to do that this year as well. Now, once you get beyond the Canterbury's, and there's other types of little tricks that you can use to set these things on stands and brackets. We'll talk more about that as season goes on. When you start using foothold type traps, you're going to, for upland sets necessarily, now not necessarily for water sets. For water sets, trapping wire works really, really well. Things like pieces of cable with loops in both ends that you can just wrap around the tree and clip it off to with a speed clip like these will work really, really well for you. And I like the speed clips on just about everything, because once you put an earth anchor in the ground for a foothold type trap and you bury that thing in there with a setter like this and you pull it sideways in the ground, you about have to have a special tool to get that thing out of the ground, or you've got to pull it out with a four-wheeler or something that you can put a lot of pressure on this thing to get it out, because they're not coming out of the ground real easy, and an animal's definitely not going to pull them out. So what I choose to do is, these are called disposable earth anchors for a reason. I usually leave them in the ground season to season a lot of times and just put a piece of flagging tape on them after I take the speed clip off, depending on the size of trap I'm using. And I take the trap off, I just put a piece of colored flagging tape on there so I know where it's at for the next season. But I pretty much have my traps or my trap locations that I use from season to season plotted into a GPS, and I remember where they're at anyway for the most part, because I'm not setting that many sets. Although I've probably got 50 different set locations, I'm only using about 24 to 25 traps at a time. So a set of earth anchors is something that you're going to want, and an earth anchor driver. Now you can use just regular stakes, but again, it's that much more weight to have to carry. They're easy enough to make from rebar if you don't want to buy disposable earth anchors and things like that. But I choose to use them because they're simple. Once you start getting into upland type sets, you're going to want, and I've got two different types of earth anchors here. I've got larger ones and smaller ones. And I've got an earth anchor setter here that's homemade out of a piece of rebar, and I've got one that's machine made out of a piece of steel. Now you're going to also want, I've got a smaller set of trap setters here as well. You're going to want something that you can dig with. And for me, this groundhog type tool, and you can see how old this thing is, it's been beat on for about 5 years now. I just wrapped the handle up with friction tape. It's got a shovel on one end, it's got a digging tool on one side and a hammer on the other. This gives me a multifunctional tool that I can make a trap set with all in one without having to carry multiple tools to do it. Now, if you want to carry something like this hole digger, this thing works out really, really well, and I carry it for that reason, because I like what it does. It'll dig a good deep hole really fast. It's almost like a core sampler. And you pull a core sample out, and you've got, a 12-inch deep hole at an angle below your set. If you're trapping for canines, things like that, you can really shove that bait in there, make them work the set, make them work for it. It's just more likely for them to get in the trap. But if I'm doing cubbies and pocket sets and things like that, this tool right here will do it all around the water, no problem. I carry this extra piece when I'm trapping on land. And then you're going to want a couple of sifters of different sizes. I use this heavy duty steel one right here that's made out of reinforced steel or reinforcement mesh here, and solid steel sides, because I can use this for digging and I can use it for sifting. If I really want to get some fine sifting done, I carry a smaller sifter inside that if it's convenient to do so. And that's just for sifting dirt and roughage over your trap set to make it look more natural. So those things are the things that you're really going to want depending on what you're trapping. Like I said, you can get away with really, really simple if you're just trapping with conibears, doing pocket sets and things like that. Trapping wire, a single digging tool, and a couple conibear tools is really all you need. Once you start getting into more complicated upland trap sets for things like fox, coyote, cats, and things like that, then you're going to want to add a few more complicated or more refined tools to your kit. But I would definitely recommend one of these heavy duty sifters when the time comes that you buy a sifter, because this one's about 4 years old now. And other than the rust and the patina on it, it's as good as it was the day it was bought, and you could just about drive over that thing with your truck and never destroy it. Whereas most of these newer ones are made from like an aluminum pie pan with the bottom of it cut out and a piece of mesh tack welded in it. Those, you can tear those up fairly easy, although this one's about 3 years old. So they last a long time as you don't abuse them. But that's a pretty thin mesh. If you dropped a heavy tool on it or something like that while you're packing up your trapping stuff, you could punch that out of there or break that screen. This thing, you're never going to tear this thing up. I can just about guarantee you that. Okay, so you got all your trapping stuff and you're ready to do your sets and you're ready to go. What are you going to carry this stuff in? Well, I generally use a sled to be honest with you. I'll either pull it behind a four-wheeler or a Rokon, or I will just pull it behind me if there's a good amount of snow on the ground. This year, I actually bought one of these heavy-duty reinforced trapping baskets. It's made out of a heavy plastic with a drain hole in the bottom of it. And I thought I would give that a try this year just to see how it works out, so that I can drag that sled to an area and then walk away from it, especially in a water setting area where I can check, 4, 5, 110s or 160s or whatever I've got going on pocket sets, carry this around with just a few tools in it out of the sled, a few extra traps in case I got to do a reset and take a trap with me, something gets fouled up or I lose a trap by chance. Then I've got that stuff with me in this basket. I'm going to try that out this year. I've used trap baskets. I've used about every trap basket there is, including a trash can strapped to an Alice pack frame. And the trash can works pretty good, especially if you don't have a lot of money, but it's just not really big enough for what I want. This thing is a lot bigger than the garbage can. It's got a contoured back on it. It's got straps that are built into it and bolted onto it. I don't think you could ever destroy this thing no matter what you do. And if you put a cork in the bottom of that thing made out of rubber from a scientific supply place or a lab supply place, it would hold water as well. And turned upside down, it would make a great seat around camp. So I don't think that's a bad investment no matter what if you're doing a lot of heavy duty trapping. Okay guys, so I'm out here getting ready for trapping season, and we're going to talk a little bit about trapping, both self-reliance style trapping and fur trapping. But today what we're doing is we're kind of getting ready for a season, and I've got some new traps here, and I'm making sure that each one of these traps is tagged. That's Ohio state law, and most states have the same law, that you have to have a tag on the trap that has at least your name and phone number on it. So I'm going through and I'm putting these tags on. It's really simple. You just buy the tags, and they're usually made out of copper. You can make up your own tags out of soda pop cans and things like that as well. But these tags pretty much are going to last forever. You put them on there and it's a one and done. And I just put a mid chain somewhere, and a regular old pair of fence pliers is used to squeeze that D-ring together. Real simple, just like this. Fold it over. Of course, you got to get it straight in the pliers first. Fold that dude over, and it's good forever. So I take all my traps and make sure that each one of them has that copper tag on it. Now I've got a few tags in here that are older. This one's still got a copper tag on it, you can see, so it's still in good shape. But I've got some in here that have makeshift type tags on them, or the thinner metal tags that you write on with something hard. And I'm going to replace those this year with true copper tags. So that's what I'm doing now, and then I'm going to clean the traps up. We'll talk about that in a minute. And we're going to speed dip the traps to get them ready for the season, and we'll talk about that as well. Stay with us. Okay, so I've got 6 of these coon cuffs, and the brand really is insignificant. It depends on what you want to do and what brand you prefer. Again, sometimes with traps you get what you pay for. And now I'm going to use speed dip, which is just a quart jar that you mix with a gallon of gasoline, and it evaporates very shortly, and it will dye your traps and get them colored dark brown black for you. And if you fill this thing up with gas, you're going to be able to do it a little bit quicker. You're going to have to kind of slosh things around a little bit. It doesn't take a whole lot. They're going to come out of there brownish black. You can see what they look like coming out of there with that speed dip on them. And you want that stuff to kind of run and drip off. So what I do is I set up a line to hang my traps on after I speed dip them. And so I just hang those traps up on a line after I speed dip them. Doesn't take any time. You don't have to let them soak in there very long. A couple minutes is good enough. And then just let them hang until they're dry, and the smell, like I said, will dissipate. You want to do this stuff a couple of weeks before trapping season. Okay, let's talk for a minute about a trap that's 3 or 4 years old, like this 450 Minnesota brand. And again, the brand of your traps really is up to you. It depends on what you want to spend and what you want to do. You can just take a wire bristle brush and knock any heavy rust off of them, if there is any. These traps will work. I can tell you, even if they're rusted. People get a little bit overcomplicated with this whole trap prepping thing. Pete Askins told me one time at the Fur Takers of America College that he had taken traps that were prototype design traps and things like that straight out of the boxes with the factory oil on them and put them in the ground and caught animals with them. So I think some of that's a little overrated. I mean, in this day and age when the coyote and the fox and things like that are in pretty much urban areas anyway, they smell things like oil and gas and human scent all the time. And I don't think there's a whole lot to the fact that's going to drive them off of a trap, especially if you're trapping, like I said, in a rural area or around roadways and things like that. Now, if you're trapping out in the middle of nowhere, it might have some effect. Most of us aren't doing that. So I just get rid of most of the heavy rust, and then I'll put that on the string and I'll speed dip that. I've got an old tag on this one. You can see it's kind of funked up here. It's kind of a mess, so I want a good tag on that thing that's nice and legible. So I'm going to put a new tag on that for this year and cut the old one off. And I'll do that with the rest of these 450s, and I've got half a dozen of these 450s as well. Speed dip them and hang them for the season, and they'll be ready to go. Okay, so the next traps that I'm working on here are Canterbury traps, and these are your suitcase style killing traps that close in X fashion on the animal when the trap is fired. And we'll talk more about this stuff as the trapping series goes along. But for self-reliance purposes, and again, there's different types of trapping in my opinion, from self-reliance to fur trapping to emergency trapping. But for self-reliance purposes, I would have to say that these Canterbury type traps, especially the 220, is probably the most significant trap that you can have in your arsenal, because it will probably bring you more food than any other trap you've got, and it does not have to be baited. It's a blind set or trail set type trap, although it can be baited. And these type traps will work for mammals as well as fish in emergencies. But a 220 Canterbury like this in the state of Ohio, this has almost a 7-inch jaw spread, has to be set in water in the state of Ohio. This thing will kill coons on land. It will kill possums on land like there ain't no tomorrow. And it's probably the best all-around trap for putting meat on the table, in my opinion, bar none. But again, check your state game regulations before you go out and set these traps, because in Ohio, this trap has to be set on water because the jaw inside diameter is larger than 5 inches. Okay, so depending on what type of trapping you're doing, obviously is going to dictate the size of your line, as well as whatever conveyance you have to travel, and whether you're walking your line or whether you have a snowmobile, a sled, a Rokon, a truck, you're riding the roads, doing road trapping, things like that. All of those things dictate. But for me, I try to keep my trap line down to 25 traps or less. And it's because I'm really not trying to be a fur trapper. I'm not trying to make that huge fur check at the end of the year. That's not my idea behind trapping. My idea behind trapping is to have a few furs to trade here and there, and have meat that I can feed on during the winter months. It's a hunter-gatherer mentality. Trapping is always going to provide more food for you than hunting as a general rule, because it's passive. 25 traps is quite a bit of weight to have to carry. You're going to need some kind of a conveyance and a sled of some kind to carry that many traps. But that many traps affords you lots and lots of opportunities to catch game. Now, let's talk about why the selection of traps that I have real quick. Because truly speaking, in all transparency, for a self-reliance emergency type scenario, all bets are off. Give me a dozen coon cuffs and a dozen 220 Canterbury's, and I will not go hungry. Guaranteed I'll not go hungry. From a seasonal trapping standpoint here in the state of Ohio, and doing things legally, because it's not an emergency, it's not a true self-reliance scenario where I can't go to the grocery store, we're not in a depression, I've got money. I've got 6 coon cuffs, or dog-proof raccoon traps they call them. I've got 3 155 Magnum Canterbury's. I'm not really after mink. I'm after food, so the muskrat is really the smallest thing I'm trying to trap around water. I've got the 155s for that, for blind sets, underbanks, undercut banks, things like that. We'll talk about that later on in the series. I've got a half a dozen 450 Minnesota brand traps here, double coil springs, and these are mainly for coyote. Although 550s are a better coyote trap, a 450 will catch a coyote, a bobcat, or a large raccoon or a fox. And being that's a little bit smaller, it's easier to use it multifunctionally for trapping coon as well in baited sets. I have 6 #1 single long springs. Those are for water trapping mainly. Coon, possum, muskrat, things like that. And then I have 4 220 conibears. Again, those are your meat providers right there for sure. If you could set them on land, you'd be guaranteed food. But because you have to use them in the water, they still make great sets for certain animals around water areas. I don't have any traps large enough for trapping beaver, because in Ohio, unless you're trapping private land, if you're trapping a wildlife area, it's a draw to trap beaver, and beaver come in very late in the season, like the end of December, for trapping through January, latter part of January, something like that. So I'm not really interested in trapping beaver, although I do understand how to trap beaver. This 25 traps right here gives me everything I need to produce plenty of fur for trade and plenty of meat for me to eat all winter long. And we're going to talk about these traps and this trap line this winter as we go through this series. All right, folks, well, I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters in the Pathfinder School, and this has just been a little primer video that we will begin with in our trapping series this year. I wanted to show you a few of the traps that I plan to use on the line, some of my rationale behind the traps that I'm using, and then talk a little bit about getting some of those traps ready, whether they're brand new traps or whether they're traps that you used last year for the last 5 years. And then also a little bit about tools of the trade that I find are the most important to have in case you're just getting into trapping and you want to understand what you really should go out and spend your money on. Because trapping is one of those hobbies, just like many others, that you can spend a lot of money you really don't need to spend very, very quickly buying this, that, and the other thing and every latest gadget on the planet, and you really don't need it. Trapping is not that difficult. It's a matter of understanding the animal, setting on sign, and understanding what's going to bring that animal to your trap and then the proper trap to catch that animal. That's really as simple as it gets. And I would recommend that you start off, give yourself a budget, get yourself 20 to 25 traps, the gear you need to set those traps, and get out and practice. But pay attention to your game laws in your state or your local area before you set the first trap, whether it's on your land or on public land. I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters. I thank you for joining me today for this video. I thank you for everything you do for our school, for our family, and for our business, for all of our sponsors, instructors, affiliates, and friends, and I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Thanks, guys.